Alrighty, today we are continuing in our study on faith-building techniques and activities. And our purposes in this are to be ready to access the promises in God's Word by faith in time of trouble. In time of trouble. Too high, too low? Alright, how about jump? Alright, try that. And that time of trouble, I believe, is ahead for the United States because of, well, I'm just going to say it, insane policies by our government towards Israel. Time for another news update. I give these every week or two. Some of you may have seen this one. Israel attacked a convoy full of weapons that was inside Syria this week. The convoy included possibly chemical weapons. Sarin gas, they believe, was in the convoy. It was headed out of Syria into Lebanon for the Hezbollah terrorists. All right? Government of Syria thinks they're going to be falling soon. And so to make sure that these evil weapons get into the hands of terrorists that they have supported for a long time, because Assad has been supporting Hezbollah in Lebanon, he wanted to get those weapons into their hands so they can continue the struggle against Israel, who they must hate very deeply in their hearts. So Israel attacked, and Israel now has begun issuing gas masks to all of her citizens all over the country of Israel. They are very concerned that a chemical warfare attack is going to happen. So they are issuing those gas masks even as we speak. Now, the material point is that Israel will not allow weapons to fall into the hands of those who will use them against her. Now, this would also then include the F-16s and the tanks that are on their way from us to Egypt. They are subject to attack at any time because Israel's not going to allow them to be used against them. But it also means that the United States has triggered the curse of Genesis 12 by giving weapons to a man who says the Jews are descended from apes and pigs. That's the new dictator of Egypt. Now, as we learned previously in recent weeks, the consequences of the curse may not occur instantaneously. The Oslo Accords, under two administrations back, that, I believe, triggered the lack of protection on America that we call 9/11. It was a number of years later that this effect actually caught up with the cause. So, that means that you may have some time to work on faith building, to be ready for those attacks that are being triggered by policy today. But economic drought is already upon us. It's already here. But wait a minute, Keith, are you saying then that I should be stockpiling food and water and gold, etc., to be ready? Well, you can if you want. But what I'm teaching is actually better than that and is more important than that. If you have sufficient faith substance, you will tell trees to go here, and you will tell the devil to go there. And they will obey you. And that's what you really need in dark times. So, today go ahead and turn on over to Matthew 17. I mean, I'm old enough to remember my dad had a good buddy who built a bomb shelter during the Cuban Missile Crisis, 61, 62, somewhere around in there. We went and visited his house. And this thing looked like the hatch on a submarine. In fact, it kind of looked like a big underground submarine that someone had buried in the dirt. So you opened the hatch like a Navy vessel, and you opened it up, and you climbed down a ladder, and down inside is this tube that is his bomb shelter, and it's got all of his all of his supplies and things like that. My dad looked at that. Yeah, this is pretty serious. Took it to heart. Went to the store and bought 6 cans of water. And took them home because there were 6 of us. And we didn't kind of realize it until later, and they were officially packaged because there was a company making them. He said they didn't have plastic bottles back then. They were cans. It was like a soda can full of water. that he had just bought. And it wasn't even super purified. It was, sure it was good water, but some guy was just filling cans with water, and he was selling them to people who were afraid. My dad wasn't going to be left in the cold. He got those 6 cans. That meant each of us got 1 can of water in case of the big attack. I saved one of those cans of water when I found them many years later, and I have it in my house up on a shelf just so I can look at it and remember my dad fondly. Anyway, his friend built the bomb shelter. It cost thousands. My dad got the 6-pack. Okay, anyway. Matthew 17, verse 14. Let's read this. This is a passage you're familiar with. I teach often on this passage, but it's an important stepping stone, a jumping off point for understanding faith building. Verse 14, and when they came to the multitude, a man came up to him, falling on his knees before him, and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic and is very ill. And he often falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him. And Jesus answered and said, O unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him here to me. Now, I just want to say as an aside, we've discussed this passage, this one little passage within a passage before. He's not calling him perverted because they're looking at porn or they're doing strange, perverse things. What he's calling perverted is the situation that's before him, which is that a devil is withstanding men of faith. That is a perverted situation. That should not be the case. Men of faith should reorder that situation and should control, put underfoot that demon that is troubling that boy. So it's a perversion. It is a reversal of the way things ought to be, the way Jesus has come to earth to change things. All right? So that's what that phrase is specifically referring to. Faith should be in charge here. It should not be the other way around. Continuing on. And Jesus rebuked him, the spirit, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was cured at once. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, Why could we not cast it out? And he said to them, Because of the littleness of your faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you shall say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it shall move, and nothing shall be impossible to you. But this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting. Prayer and fasting. Now, you will note this first important fact. The faith amount of the disciples was not large enough for the demon that is involved. All right. Now, this is the 17th chapter of Matthew. It's well along in the gospel story. The disciples have already gone out 2 by 2 into the cities of Israel, and they have healed, and they have delivered all over the land. In fact, when they returned from that time way previous to this, they announced that even the demons were subject to us in Jesus' name. Remember that from Luke chapter 10. So what's wrong here? What's going on? There is a perversion. There's something very wrong here. These disciples at this point in their ministry are his prayer ministers. They are handling the healing line. You notice he said, I brought him to your disciples. Jesus isn't the first point of contact now in these meetings. The disciples are handling the healing line. Because what? They've been all over. They know how to do this. They lay hands on the sick and they see people recover. So the disciples are the first point of contact. They are doing the healing line. Jesus, in fact, is stepping back a little bit and he's observing what's going on at this point in his ministry. So, why can't they do it? because the substance of faith is too small for this kind, this level, this rank of evil spirit. This devil is bigger than the faith that they operate in. The problem is littleness of faith. It's not technique. Nothing wrong with Jesus' name, that still works. It is not even the earnest desire of their hearts somehow being lacking. That's not the case. So, what is the remedy for that problem? Well, Jesus tells us plainly that this kind will go out through the process of prayer and fasting. Prayer and fasting. But you know, Jesus did not pray and did not fast at that moment in that passage. He just commanded in power, and the devil jumped and he ran. So the picture is really clear. Jesus has fasted. We know that from Matthew chapter 4. He has prayed. And now he operates in largeness of faith. And he sends these devils out instantly with just a word. He comes on the scene and says, scram, and they go. Right? So, make notes here. Make notes. You cannot fast at a demon to cast them out. It will not work. You cannot go to prayer on your knees and thereby cast the demons out. What you do is begin a regimen of prayer and fasting to build up your faith substance so that when the big confrontation with the devil comes, you are ready. You are ready. I mean, that makes sense, but what did we think? I mean, what were we thinking looking at this passage? Do we suppose that you can somehow get into a tussle with Satan and then call a timeout? Hold it, scratch, I'm going to go fast tomorrow. Then how about if I meet you again here back on Tuesday and we'll go at this again? I will be stronger on Tuesday because I'll take a fast day in between my attack on your hold on this person. Well, you know what? The devil's going to just clean your clock completely if you try and do that. That's not going to work. You have got to be ready. You've got to be prayed up. You've got to be fasted up. You've got to be full of the Word. You've got to be praying in tongues when the battle falls into your lap. And I didn't put the reference here, but I'm just reminded about a story from the Old Testament. When King Saul is leading his army out to fight the Philistines, and his son Jonathan is also a captain of a force, and that force is out there fighting the Philistines. And Saul declares, this army must now fast as we go and attack our enemies. But Jonathan was someplace else, and he didn't get that word. And so he and some other troops, they're off doing some great things against those Philistines, and they go into this forest. And it says Saul's army went through the forest earlier, and there was a flow of honey in that forest. Now, I'm not sure what a flow of honey is, but it's like the honey is just flowing through this forest. It was everywhere. But the troops with Saul were afraid to touch it because he had put a curse on them. He said, the one who eats food this day will die. And they didn't touch it. But Jonathan then comes through the same forest later on. There's the honey. Man, he starts scooping it because he is ravenously hungry. He's been gaining victories against their enemies. And he starts to eat it. And some other troops come up and say, no, no, no. Your father has put a curse on the man who eats this day. And Jonathan says, you know what? My father has troubled this land this day. Because if we had eaten during this battle would have been, the victory would have been much, much greater. As it is, this victory is a small victory. But we should have eaten this day and done battle. So the point there is really important. The time to fast is not when the battle is on you. When the enemy's there at the gates, it's time to fight. You don't go to fasting, you go to battle. And you've got to be ready, you've got to be strong as you need to be. Jonathan's eating on the day of battle. Sometimes the devil can confuse us a little bit and say, oh, this is a big battle. What you need to do is go fast right now. Now's the time to fast. You can be as weak and worn out, have a headache or something like that. And then go to battle against my troops. Because it's the devil who's suggesting that to you. Now, that's not the time to fast. The time to fast is before. You need to be ready. You need to be there, ready with your armament. It's not time like, oh, I'm at the battlefield now. Now I got to take inventory. Do I need a gun here? Do I have my armor? What do I need? You're in the battle. That's crazy. You are prepared beforehand. You are shod with the preparation of the gospel. You have that helmet of salvation on, right? The shield of faith is there. And then you go to battle. So, having said all of that, let's look today at prayer and fasting as faith builders. Now, we talked last week about prayer in the Spirit, all right? Praying in tongues as a specific faith-building activity. So we have mostly covered the concept of prayer as a faith builder, but let me add that there is faith building accomplished by conventional prayer as well. Intercessors in English also grow in faith. Go ahead and look at Acts chapter 12. See what's going on here, starting with verse 3, and this is old Herod has arrested Peter. And when Herod saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. Now it was during the days of unleavened bread. And when he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out before the people. So, Peter was kept in the prison, but prayer for him was being made fervently by the church of God. And on the very night when Herod was about to bring him forward, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers bound with 2 chains, and guards in front of the door were watching over the prison. And behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell, and he struck Peter's side and roused him, saying, "Get up quickly." And his chains fell off his hands. You know the rest of the story. The connection is really perfectly clear in this passage. People were praying fervently in their own conversant language, mostly Hebrew, and they were praying specifically for Peter's safety and Peter's release. In other words, to analyze it, they are praying in English, praying with their mind, all right? And Peter was released. Peter was released. And you know what? It was faith that released him. So, intercession is a faith builder, as well as praying in the Spirit is a faith builder. The effectual, fervent prayer of the righteous man availeth much. So, become a prayer person and pray with your spirit and pray with your mind also. And faith will grow within. It'll grow in size, it'll grow in volume, and that's what we're all about. So, let's move on then and look a little more closely at the fasting part of this today. And I think I want to concentrate on that because I think it is very much misunderstood. It is the more misunderstood part of the prayer and fasting equation. Many look at fasting as a sacrificial act of self-punishment. They see that their suffering will somehow please God, and then He will take pity on them and maybe grant their request. And that really is a very peculiar picture concerning fasting. It's a peculiar picture to actually have of God. In Matthew, a boy needed deliverance ministry, and so Jesus said, fast for faith. Because you have to do deliverance ministry, fast for faith. The Bible is completely at odds with traditional suffering kind of fasting. Go ahead and look over at Isaiah chapter 58. And if you're not familiar with this passage, underline it, remember it, make note of it, get it into your heart and mind. This is so important to understand if you are going to be a faster. Chapter 58, starting with verse 3. The Lord is speaking through the prophet, but the Lord will be speaking actually in this passage. But basically, up earlier, he's saying, why are you saying, why have we fasted and thou dost not see? Why have we humbled ourselves and thou dost not notice? Behold, on the day of your fast, you find your desire and drive hard all your workers. Behold, you fast for contention and strife and to strike with a wicked fist. In other words, you use your fasting as an opportunity to justify having a very sour disposition and misbehaving. I'm fasting today, so you guys just have to act differently around me. You use that fasting as an excuse to not walk in love and not walk as a child of God. You do not fast like you do today to make your voice heard on high. So your whole concept of fasting is wrong. You're not doing it right. You want to have your prayers answered and heard, and you're doing it all wrong. It's not about humbling. It's not about acting the way you do. I ask the question in verse 5. Is it a fast like this which I chose, a day for a man to humble himself? Is it for bowing one's head like a reed, and for spreading out sackcloth and ashes as a bed? Will you call this a fast, even an acceptable day to the Lord? The implied answer is no. Those things are not correct fasting. Now, verse 6. Is this not the fast which I chose? To loosen the bonds of wickedness, to undo the bands of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free and break every yoke. Stop there for a minute. The purpose of fasting is not suffering or for doing a holy and pious act for all to see. Fasting is to break the strongholds of Satan on people's lives. Now, doesn't that fit perfectly with what we're just reading in Matthew chapter 17? To break oppression, to break slavery to the devil. The fact that God chose and ordained, the fast rather, that God chose and ordained is to loosen the bands of wickedness. That's the fast that I have chosen. Now, note it says loosen and not cut. To loosen the bands, but not cut them. Because fasting is a process. Fasting takes time. Fasting is part of a faith-building regimen. You can't say, whoa, I'm up against a big demon. God, I'm fasting from this moment on, and then go to the battle. Well, you got a little 30-second fast going. No, fasting is a process. It's a time thing, and I'll explain a little more about that in a second. But it is over time that you grow in faith and are able to break those holds. So then, there actually is a process in verse 6. If you look at it up there, it's still up there, but if you look at verse 6 again, you see a process actually taking place. First, you loosen, working at this thing. I'm loosening this bond. Then you actually undo it. Then you set the person free. And what's the last thing you do? You break the device of bondage last. All right? So begin to loosen it. Then actually untie it. Then actually take the ropes off the person. And then you take care of the thing that bound them, that was their yoke to begin with. Now, that's a very important process there. There's a lot of things that bind people up that are yokes on them. So that has to be destroyed. That has to be shattered. But you're not able to start with that. You start with the loosening, then you undo, then you set them free, then you break the device. You see that? Very interesting and very clearly a process. All right? Process. Lastly, you're able to break that yoke. Now, Look at what happens or is supposed to happen when you fast. Continuing on down to verse 7. Talking about the fast that God chose. Is it not to divide your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into the house? When you see the naked, to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh? Then your light will break out like the dawn, and your recovery will speedily spring forth, and your righteousness will go before you. The glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then, this is the guy who has fasted, then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry, and he will say, here I am. If you remove the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness. Now, these are the direct results of fasting to build faith. You call, God answers. You cry out, and he is there right now. Right now. This is immediate answer to prayer. Immediate, I am here situation. Not the long-term struggle, because this person now has grown in faith, and faith is what makes those things happen. Faith is what triggers the quick response. Faith power, faith substance. All right. So, those things, instantaneous things, happen when you have large faith. Large faith. So, fasting is faith building. Once this person figured out, I have to loosen the bonds of wickedness, I'm fasting to do battle, I'm fasting to be able to deliver people from satanic holds, and you succeed at that, then you cry and God says, I'm here. You call out, right now the answer is there. That's the kind of result that comes from being a faith builder through fasting. Now, of all the messages that I ever teach, the subjects that I teach on, fasting is by far the most unpopular. People don't like fasting. I don't like fasting. You know, I fasted once a week for more than 10 years. I'm not even sure how many years it was. Sometimes I was on a twice